We're going to get going with our panel this afternoon called Optimizing for Trust in News. I'm Jay Rosen. I teach journalism at New York University. This is Jennifer Brandel. This is Rob Wijnberg. And I'm going to take a few minutes to explain the origins of this event, and then Jennifer and Rob have short presentations, and then we'll have a short discussion, and then we'll ask you to participate as well. So thank you all for coming. This panel, Optimizing for Trust in News, had its origins last year at Newsgeist in Phoenix, where Aaron Pilhofer, who is now at Temple University, previously at the New York Times and The Guardian, asked a really good question. He said, what would a news organization look like if it were optimized for trust? What would a news organization look like if it were optimized for trust? Not for traffic, or for travel ads, or for clicks, or prizes, or balance, but for trust. Now, this is a great question because it pulls the camera back to reveal a much bigger picture than we usually include when we talk about trust at conferences like that. Normally, the trust discussion is dominated by three questions. One, how do we produce trustworthy content? Which is basically how to do good journalism that's accurate, fair. Second, how do we get out into our communities so that we can be trusted, which is essentially a question about listening. How do we listen better? And third, how do we create more diverse newsrooms? Because if we don't look like, how can we expect to be trusted by the community? And those are all very important questions. Usually, for the last year or so, people then throw in, how do we cover Trump's tweets? And what about fake news? But Aaron's question, how do we optimize everything we're doing for trust, cuts much deeper. It also invites imagination. What would it look like? What would a news organization look like if it were optimized for trust? So the more I thought about it, the more I realized that only this more complete approach could have any hope of succeeding in the aftermath of the debacle for trust that was the 2016 election. And around that time, November of last year, I learned that the Correspondent, the Dutch startup that is almost completely member-funded, was planning to expand to the United States. The more I looked at the Correspondent's design, philosophy, and operating style, the way they did things, the more I realized that among news sites that I know, this Dutch startup, the Correspondent, comes the closest to optimizing for trust. If that's what it's going to take after the debacle of the 2016 election, and if they're planning to expand to the US, as I learned, then that was something that I wanted to be involved in. So I offered to help them get started here in the United States as their first ambassador to the US market. And I also raised money from the Knight Foundation and the Democracy Fund for a project that would study the membership model as a key element in restoring trust and as a way to sustain serious journalism. So I am now the director of a new project that's been operating since May. It's called the Membership Puzzle Project. It's funded by Knight and Democracy Fund, and we are studying how membership works at the Correspondent and the lessons for US sites from their success, and how membership models in the US work so that the Correspondent, as it expands here, has good information. And yesterday and today, we released our newest research, which is a database of over 100 news organizations that are trying the membership model as a way to sustain serious journalism and produce more trust. So if you're interested in membership as a way of sustaining serious journalism, you should come talk to me afterwards, or Emily Galagoski, our research director, who's sitting in the front row, and we'd love to chat you up about that. So, here to dig into optimizing for trust are representatives of two organizations that are doing crucial work on this very problem. Jennifer Brandel, CEO of Hearken, which is pushing what we normally call engagement further back into the editorial process at the point of story idea and story formation. And next to Jennifer is Rob Wijnberg, who's co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Correspondent in Amsterdam, and he'll tell you more about that in a minute. So, Jennifer, tell us about Hearken and optimizing for trust.
Right on. Okay, I'll grab the clicker over here. I guess I will sashay across the stage. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you're not in lunch coma land. I'm going to talk quickly, so hopefully that'll perk you up as well. These are all of us in case you want to tweet at us or follow us or just see our faces again so you know who's who. All right, Hearken. I think a lot about trust in terms of not just how to create it, but what are ways to destroy it, and so that I can better understand how to create it. Because it is a squishy issue, it's a little bit hard to wrap your head around, but we all know what it feels like when you break trust with someone as an individual, as a collective, as a brand. And so I just wanted to go through a few ways that you can break trust with the public and your audience. And this is from an article called 50 Ways to Lose Trust and Credibility. So the first two that I grouped together are be inaccessible, show a lack of care and concern. So in the news industry, this might translate into shutting your comment section down, making it really difficult for people to get in touch with you, figure out even how to call you, how to email you, how to get in touch with a reporter. Basically say, we're shut off. You cannot touch us. The next two, misunderstand the needs of your audience and sell what you have, not what's needed. I know this happens a lot with grant-funded projects. Oh, we got a bunch of money to do this kind of reporting. Well, does the public need it? I don't know. We have the money. Let's report it. And then the third set is really about just being interested only when you need something. So maybe you're doing a membership drive, you're trying to get more people to subscribe to a newsletter, come to a big benefit. That's when you start turning on the, hey, great to see you guys, how you doing, kind of vibe. So these are ways to destroy trust that maybe your newsroom is not doing, but maybe there are elements of it that they are unintentionally doing. And so I just want to look at the corollary or the reversal of how you can take these and flip them on its head. So trust really requires a way for the public to be heard. If you really care about what they think, prove it. You have to create a way for you to listen to what they care about. And then these two correspond to not only a way for them to tell you, but a way for your newsroom to listen. We see a ton of engagement projects going on around the industry where so many people are talking in the newsroom, but no one's actually listening. It's just going in a black box and they're checking off, oh, we got 100,000 clicks or likes or comments, but it doesn't change anything. So that's a problem. And then the last part is really doing this consistently, not just being there when you need something, but being there for them all the time. So Hearken is really an answer to all of these sorts of requirements for trust. The word itself means listen. You might have heard it in Christmas songs. And we help news organizations listen to the public as a story develops all the way from pitch through publication. And we call the model public-powered journalism, because without the public, these stories would not be made. It's not that the public comes in at the very end to distribute or to comment. They're there from the very get-go. And so I'm going to take you real quick through how the model works and show you a few examples and then what the outcomes are. So this is what journalism traditionally looks like. The public isn't involved in any meaningful way until it's too late, after publication. After all the decisions have been made and the reporter's running on to their next story. And we know, the comment section has its problems. It's not really designed for great listening and actionable insight. And so Hearken is the opposite of this. We help newsrooms do public-powered stories where the public can intervene at every important step of the decision-making process, starting with collecting their questions. What don't they know that your newsroom could spend your time and resources finding out for them? And then the other two parts are where the audience can vote on which stories you should pursue from the ones that you say that you think you could cover. And then the third is actually working with the members of the public to do those stories. I don't know what that sounded, sorry. Working with the members of the public to be part of the storytelling process so they can see how journalism is made. They can see more transparently your process for getting that information and trust it more. And so we built a platform to make this easier for newsrooms to do this. And there's different modules you can put on your website, et cetera, to collect that information so it can become actionable in your organization. So put another way, this is what traditional journalism looks like. It's at a distance from the public. The public is looked like as a mass, as a collection of data, demographics, or dollar signs, and not as individuals. And it's a newsroom saying, here's what we think you need to know, which is not a great way to build trust. Instead, if you frame it as what you can do for the public and ask them, what do you not know that we, the people with the time and energy and resources to find information out, could find out for you? That is a way to build trust and to work with people as individuals and not treat them like some demographic class. And so I'll take you through the process real quickly. Here's an example with the BBC. So they use Hearken on lots of different things, but including breaking news stories. So the Brexit news comes out in November last year. They put the story up as much as they know at that given moment. At the bottom of the story, they ask people, what additional questions do you have? Because of course, people are just left with so much curiosity after hearing that this vote came down. So the public asks those questions, they flow into our back end, an editor or producer ends up seeing the kind of most popular things people are asking. They put a team on it, the next day they come out with an FAQ essentially, which is so relevant because it's answering questions that people in the newsroom wouldn't have necessarily thought to ask. Things that people with different life experiences and perspectives want to know that wouldn't have occurred to all the reporters. So this is one way of doing it in a breaking news scenario, and I'll take you through real quick another way, which is creating original content. This is a partner of ours in San Francisco, KQED. Someone wanted to know about nudity in San Francisco because a little girl was walking around seeing naked people in San Francisco and asked her mom about it. A great question. And so they ended up taking on the story. So the public was able to ask that question about the Bay Area. They ended up being able to track votes over time. They put it up for a vote to see if the public really cared about it before they spent the time and money to do the work. And they really did care about it. And they ended up putting the story out. It was extremely, extremely popular. So it was one of their best performing stories of all time. It hit on something that a lot of people had wondered about as well. And so what we've learned is that when you listen to the public and you bring them into the process early on, the value follows in tons of different ways. So the return on investment for reporters is they're creating more original, relevant, and popular content, sometimes 11 to 15 times more popular than other stories. Then it's also boosting the bottom line because brands and advertisers want to be seen alongside this community-created content. And then you can also collect people's email addresses. So unlike when you do on Facebook where they have that relationship with the audience and you have to work with them, you can collect people's emails directly and work with them for membership campaigns and have them be part of supporting your journalism. And so one of our partners, Bitch Media, found that people who engaged with this process were up to 5 times more likely to become paying members because they felt a part of the community. They weren't just at the whim of what the newsroom was reporting. They were helping to shape it as well. And so the long story short, with what we've been learning, we work with about 100 newsrooms to date, is that the more your audience feels heard, and the more that they can see and tell that you're serving them directly, the more likely they are not only to trust you, but also to pay you. So there is a through line here. So that's the short, long story, but we can talk more about it as we go.
Excellent.
Yeah, thanks.
Rob?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. In case you're wondering why the guy in your conference booklet that was supposed to be on this panel is so much more handsome than the guy you're looking at, that is our publisher. And Sean, he was supposed to be here, but he couldn't make it, so he sent me. I'm sorry, at forehand. Who am I? I am the co-founder and editor-in-chief of The Correspondent. And I would like to talk to you about how we try to optimize for trust, because that's basically what we try to do at every step we take. Now, first off, for those who don't know what The Correspondent is a Dutch journalism platform, and it was founded by a crowdfunding, which is actually an integral part of our identity and how we try to build trusting relationships with our audiences. We were founded by almost 19,000 members in 2013, and they helped us originate, and we are still going strong. We, as of October 2017, have over 60,000 paying members. We are completely member-funded. And that is very important because they are the only people we serve with our journalism. And at the core, we have 10 principles at the core, but I take 5 here. At the core of The Correspondent is that we are and will forever be member-funded. We are completely ad-free, so no advertisers on our platform, no sponsored content as well. We are an openly subjective platform. We are an author's platform. We tell you how we view the world and where we are coming from. A very important part of the relationship we try to build with our readers. We also have a profit cap. to ensure that we are not maximizing for profit, but we are maximizing for trust. And one of the most important parts, and I will get back to that, is we see our readers as experts in some field or another. Now, and the basic idea of the Correspondent, and I have to tell you this because I go to a lot of conferences on journalism, and rarely do I find it is about the core topic I want to talk about all day. And I could talk about this all day. And that is, what do we consider news? Everywhere I go, from Japan to India to the United States, it seemed to me that news is defined in exactly the same way. And there are a lot of things fundamentally wrong about the definition of what we call news in modern Western societies. So the Correspondent, and this was the idea we pitched at our crowdfunding, wants to be your antidote to the daily news grind. We want to be the opposite of news, in a sense. That is the basic. We didn't have a newsroom, we didn't have authors, we didn't have journalists, we just had the idea. And by that idea got 20,000 people excited. That should tell us something. Now, what is wrong with news? I can go on forever, but this is the most important thing. News is about exceptions and never about rules. Sensational exceptions to the rule. That is what news is. And because of this definition, if you view the world through the prism of news alone, you will understand exactly how the world doesn't work, which is a fundamental problem for journalism, because we promise our audiences, we tell you, this is what is going on in the world. Now, I would like to, who has seen the movie The Big Short? Almost everybody, yes, I thought so. There's one source of information, the guy who sees the housing bubble being created in the years before the collapse of Lehman Brothers. In that movie, there's one source of information he is ignoring purposely while he's finding out this tremendous bubble that he sees. And that is the news, the daily news cycle. He's ignoring it because he knows it is misleading him for this fundamental reason. So our aim at the Correspondent is to change the definition of news. And we'd like to change it to something foundational. We don't want to speak about the sensational or the exceptional. We want to speak about the foundational. Or, as we say, news is about what happens news is about what happens today, and we would like to talk about what happens every day. We'd like to be in-depth, so not the superficial what happened just now, but in-depth stories that actually help you understand the world around you. And we also want it to be constructive journalism, not just tell you about problems, but about solutions as well. Now, and we can only do this if we are trusted by the people who read us, or listen to us, or view us, and also pay for us. Now, the first fundamental principle we have is no one can trust a view from nowhere. If you don't have a view, then there's nothing to trust in the first place. So we encourage our journalists to be completely open about where they are coming from. Explain their worldview, explain their assumptions, explain also when they change their assumptions. We regularly write posts about, this is how I changed my mind in researching this subject matter. And by doing this, you get to know the journalist. Not on a personal level, like in a diary or something, like what food he likes or what movies he went to, but on a professional level. And this is a key part of building a trusting relationship. This is actually how most human beings build trust in daily life as well. If we say we don't, if there's a metaphor in saying I don't trust this person, and that's I don't know him or her. So be as open about who you are professionally to your audience. Now, we share a lot of values with Hearken. Most of them, actually, but we see our members, our audience, as the exact opposite. Not as people who don't know stuff and have questions, but know a lot of things. And they go where we journalists don't go. They have expertise we lack. They actually are, and this is fundamental, the most valuable thing we have. There's nothing else we value more than the people who support us and read us. To realize these truths in practice, that is audience development. You can't see a panel or discussion about journalism where the word audience development is not mentioned. Every time you hear the word audience development or you hear engagement, and we constantly ask, why do we want to engage with our readers in the first place? And for us, the answer at the Correspondent is they know stuff. Put simply, 1,000 doctors who read us know way more than our medical correspondent. And almost all stories originate from this premise. So let's say we did a story on bureaucracy in Dutch healthcare, which is tremendous. It started with a simple question. If you work in a hospital or you've been a patient in a hospital and you've encountered bureaucracy in all kinds of ways, please tell us. Hundreds and hundreds of people, doctors, nurses, patients, told us about the phenomena they saw, and that was the source of our stories that followed. Now, the third principle we have, and this is our principle, it's not something every news organization can copy. I would advise them to. But that is, don't sell the true customers of your journalism to third parties, namely advertisers. So we are completely ad-free. And this helps build a trusting relationship because they are the only people we serve. We don't sell their eyeballs or attention or distract them with other sources of information that they didn't pay us to give them in the first place. So fundamental to our relationship with our readers is we just give you what you paid us for. This principle is basically about integrity. If you read a newspaper, you see a lot of wisdom about the world. You see a lot of criticisms about how organizations do bad things or how politicians are corrupt or whatever. At the Correspondent, we have a principle that says, don't just criticize the world as if you are not in it. Hold your own organization to the same standards as you put on others. We do this, for example, with a very strict privacy policy. We write a lot about how online sites that are free, supposedly free, for the user, actually get paid by your personal data. This is actually the most common business model on the internet today. You are paying with your privacy. And we wrote a lot of articles criticizing this development. But then we realized we also collect a lot of data from our visitors. And people pointed us to that. They said, aren't you doing the same? So we developed, together with our readers, a privacy policy that says we don't collect your data if we don't need it, if we're not required by law. So we don't know a lot about our readers. We just know what they know. We don't know their demographics or their age or what they're interested in. We just know the basics. And this is a way to show integrity and to build a trusting relationship in the end. And then the fifth principle, and Jay already talked about this a little, is the trust test. Ask yourself, have we optimized for trust at every decision point you come to? Not just engagement or audience development, at every level of your organization. This is a great question to ask yourself. Would we be doing this if we trusted the people involved? Let me give you one small example. We looked at the employee contracts we had, and we just went through it like, would this be in here if we trusted our employees fully? And we could almost scrap half of it. There were all these regulations and rules that we just didn't feel fit and didn't pass the trust test. And you can do this at every level of your organization. Actually, one of the most fundamental decisions we made in the beginning was not to have a paywall, because this didn't pass the trust test either. Do we really distrust you not paying for our articles And do we need a paywall in the first place? Our answer was no. If you like what we do, if you think it's valuable, you eventually will pay for it because we trust you. So that is basically what we do. We've been doing this for 4 years now in the Netherlands, and we would really like to bring it to the United States as well. So next year, we are trying to set up the Correspondent in English, because if one country needs an antidote to the daily news grind, it is the United States of America.
Thank you, Rob.
So we are translating a lot of stuff, so don't worry. You can get to know us more by going to thecorrespondent.com, which is our English language public homepage. And you can also follow me, ask questions, have suggestions on Twitter. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rob.
And now, yes, that's the slide.
I'm going to ask Jennifer one question, and then we're going to go to the crowd, because I think lots of people have questions. A couple things I wrote down during your two presentations. One is, we want to be trusted, but we also want to do controversy of the day coverage. And what Rob is saying is, maybe you can't. Maybe you can't do both of those things. That's what Antidote to the Daily News Grind is saying, right? Mm-hmm. That if you look like everyone else, you'll be as mistrusted as everyone else. So maybe you can't be trusted and do controversy of the day coverage. We want to be trusted, but we also want to retain complete sovereignty over what we cover. Hearken is saying, well, maybe you can't. Right? You want that, but maybe you can't have that if you want to be trusted. So my question to you, Jennifer, is, in your work, where Rob just knows the Correspondent because he just deals with one news organization. You know a lot of them because you work with a lot of them. So in your work, what have you found that journalists and newsrooms have to give up to get the benefits from a system like Hearken's?
That's a great question. I think they have to give up this idea that they are the only ones who can create vouchers of reality. They're the only ones who are allowed to have the news judgment to say this is important for the public and for everybody else to know. And that's a big thing. I think I didn't go to J school. I was a journalist for a long time at WBEZ in Chicago. And I think because I didn't go to journalism school, I never felt like I deserved the power to make decisions on behalf of hundreds of thousands of people who don't look like me and who have very different life experiences. And so I would ask my colleagues in the newsroom, how do you make decisions about what you cover? And they would, give me a lot of examples of news coverage and timeliness and controversy and what are these things? And it just never felt right. And I think one of the things we had to give up and that we started to help other newsrooms give up is this idea that they are the only ones who have the observational skills to come up with the things that are going to be interesting and valuable to others. And some people they know that already. They're willing to give it up. They just have never had a process and a workflow to make that possible in their newsroom. So I'm not saying this is like all journalists or everything. But that is one of the things they have to give up, is this idea that they're the only ones who can determine what's important.
Okay. I would ask people to line up at the microphones because we're going to go to your questions as soon as there are questions. Rob, would you briefly tell the story of the Belgian terrorist attack and what you did not publish for this crowd as an example of optimizing for trust?
Okay. So there was a terrible terrorist attack in Brussels, which is about an hour from our office in Amsterdam. And this was the first time when we were confronted with, as an antidote to the news, we were confronted with a news story that was so all over the place that we felt we should at least tell what our position on this is. Like, if we just publish stories that were about very different things, then it would seem we would be ignoring it, which was not our intention. If we would say, we're not publishing anything, then it would seem like we didn't care. So we had to have an explanation. And actually what we did was just be honest. And I wrote an email to all our members saying, we're not publishing anything because the news, you're not going to be interested in anything else than the news story right now, and that's fine. We won't publish about the terror attack because we don't have the expertise. We don't know enough yet. It's not our role as the kind of platform we are to cover this. There are outlets out there that can cover this way better than we do. Please go to them if you want to see the latest or hear about the latest. And we'll get back to you on this when we have something to actually tell you. So we didn't publish anything, just this email, right? That was the day we got the most new members in our existence. We got hundreds of new members that day, which worried me a little bit because that was the day we didn't do anything. So maybe people just wanted us to stop. But no, what they actually valued was, and they told us this in emails, was, hey, here's an honest answer. You just don't know yet. There are other news organizations way more fit to cover what is happening right now. You're not sending somebody just to go and get the news just like anybody else. This is what I pay you for. So basically that helped trust in a way we didn't experience before.
Okay, thank you. I love that story. Biggest one-day revenue gain came from not publishing anything. That's what I mean by optimizing for trust. Trust is bigger than publishing trustworthy material. It's about the relationship you have with your members. Let's start over here, and then we'll go to the line over here. Your question, sir.
Hi.
Identify yourself, please.
Yes, I'm Simon Galperin. I wear a couple of different hats. I'm here with the Community Information Cooperative. My question is, Rob, you referred to profit seeking in your presentation, and Jen, I know you have a critique on it. So I'd love to hear how you see profit. Is profit seeking sort of antithetical to journalism as a service, journalism that's trustworthy, and how in the United States can we begin doing sort of replicating this model of like profit caps or really optimizing for trust, optimizing for community rather than profit?
Well, we are a commercial enterprise, so we do aim to make a profit. And the reason for us is we don't just want to be an NGO that you support out of moral concerns. It should be something worth your time as well, or worth your money as well. We see ourselves as a service and as a product that that is good enough to be paid for. We don't want your dollars for, I don't know, pity or something. But by having by putting a maximum on the kind of the profits we can make and ensuring people that 95% of all our revenue is going back into the journalism, they get a sense of public service. They get a sense of this is not just a product. This is not a shoe you buy in the store. This is something for the public good as well. And this profit cap ensures that nobody's getting rich off it, doing it. So yeah, I like the in-between, not being non-profit and not being maximizing for profit as well.
Jennifer, you're sort of in that space as well, right?
Yeah.
Explain that for us.
Exactly. So technically we're a Delaware C Corporation. We're a for-profit company, but we're also a mission-based organization. And what we're finding, this is another side of what I do on nights and weekends, is trying to figure out how do we fund and support companies that don't fit those two extremes, that are not just for mission or not just for maximizing shareholder value, because we see what happens there, and nobody likes the outcomes except for the people who get super, super rich. So we are what we call a zebra company instead of a unicorn. We're black and white. We want to have a mission and we want to have money and make those two work together without compromising either. And so it is a tough space. I think journalism in and of itself doesn't fit either model very well either. So maybe more newsrooms will become so-called zebras.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely crucial. So in between venture capital and the stock market on one side and nonprofit 501c3s on the other are a range of ownership models and business models that I think really we need to develop to have serious journalism. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Adam Bender. I'm part of the ONA local in Philadelphia, and I'm a reporter with Communications Daily. I just had a question for Rob, actually, just about kind of your model. I agree with you that the readers are very smart, have a lot of expertise, but I guess they also can have very strong opinions and aren't necessarily good writers. So I'm curious, how do you ensure that you maintain balance and I guess also have a good writing quality and keep that high?
Okay, so there are a lot of ways to do that. I'll tell you a few. The first thing we did was we renamed our comment section contribution section. We call them contributions, not comments. And we actually say, please share what you know. And implicitly in that sentence is, don't share what your opinion, because opinions, everybody has opinions. A lot less people have knowledge. And we very directly and specifically ask questions towards that goal. So that's one way. The other way is people can only respond if they are a paying member. That helps. They can only contribute to our site with their real and full name. And we know it's real because they paid. And we also invite them to fill in a expertise title. So not just your name, but what do you do? Like, are you a doctor or a teacher? And combine all those things, we get a lot less of the regular comment sections like, I don't like this, or I hate that, or this is terrible, left wing, right wing, blah, blah, blah. We actually also encourage our journalists to say this out loud. Like, if this happens in our contribution section, journalists will jump in and say, hey, this is not helping. 50% of the job of a correspondent is to interact on the platform with the members. So it's a huge part of their time investment. And when they do, when they're like right in the middle of that conversation, it just stops. People understand what you're aiming at. And in general, if they go on like that, we do what every sane person would do in a room like this. If you just stood up and you just ventilated your conspiracies or whatever, we would first kindly ask you to stop, and if you didn't, we would escort you out of the room, right? That's what we do on our platform as well. At some point, we say this is not what we're aiming for.
Rob failed to mention, we'll get to you too.
He knows my platform better.
The best answer to your question, which is the 21 full-time correspondents at Day Correspondent have complete freedom in how they define their beats and what they work on. So they don't have to listen to the users if they don't want to. Right. They have independence in defining their beats and deciding on their own assignments. And so that's a protection, in a way, against, if you will, mob rule, right? But it's not totally incompatible with Hearken in that really good questions and really good urgent user need can be solicited from the users, and the writers decide whether they want to address those questions. Right. So it's like the structure of the correspondent has a protection built in from people who don't know anything demanding too much.
So the journalists are still doing the writing?
Yes. Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah, completely.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. One thing I just wanted to add that I love that the Correspondent does, and I feel like Hearken helps newsrooms do as well, is think about these three ways that you can have a relationship with the public. So one is treasure, the other's time, and the other's talent. So treasure is asking the public for their money, which we're used to doing in a lot of newsrooms, asking them to support us with their eyeballs or their actual dollars. And that is a pretty transactional relationship, which doesn't get very deep necessarily. When you ask people for their time or for their talent, like you're doing, saying you're an expert in something, suddenly they're valued for more than just being, coin when you need it. And they feel more part of your community, and they feel more invested in what you're doing. And so I feel like that time, treasure, talent, when you go for the time and the talent, you start having a relationship more than the transaction.
Right. Hi, my name is Mark Coney. I'm with Forbes, and I'm just kind of curious as your thoughts about I think trust is really vital and interest, and what you guys do is fascinating. I've been longtime fans. But what are your thoughts about how trust scales? And to the extent that all of your models are very human-driven, we pay close attention to our readers. That's not how Facebook works. That's not how Google works. That's not how even the New York Times works. They're mass audiences, and the trust, which is kind of a two-way street, is very hard to do at that scale. So how, is this kind of trust model compatible with mass media as we can conventionally think of it?
It's a very good question, because my intuitive answer, the first thing that comes to mind for me is trust sales when you become more of an institution. So people distrust institutions more than they distrust anything else. Like, it's the media as an institution, or politics as an institution, not just specific journalists or something like that. So, and if they talk about, like, I don't know, the New York Times, they distrust the New York Times. They distrust the institution, not the people in it. So every time you, in some way or another, respond to something institutionally, that, I think, is a danger, at least for us. And by that, I mean something like, to keep thinking about how would you respond. If you made a mistake, that would be a bad thing for trust, right? But if you would have an interpersonal, normal human relation with somebody, you would just say, hey, I made a mistake. This is how I made the mistake. I corrected it here. I'm sorry, even. If you do this, instead of, I don't know, fleeing behind the walls of the institution and putting it on page 28 in the corrections and saying, this didn't happen, that would help. And I think this model would work for large institutions like the New York Times or the Guardian, whatever, if they stop being an institution or try to be more of a human enterprise instead of a corporation or an institute.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that I have criticized for so long what Rob called in his presentation, the view from nowhere. Because once the institution says it has a view from nowhere, one of the results of that is that it's incredibly vulnerable to any criticism that proves you don't, right? And that is one of the biggest factors in the culture war against the mainstream media, because it's actually very easy to prove that an institution that says it has no view has a view. Anybody can do it. Even Rush Limbaugh can do it, right? And so that claim, which feels like invulnerability to the institution that makes it, is actually a huge vulnerability. Whereas we're human beings. Here's where we're coming from. We make mistakes. Yeah, we got that wrong. That's actually a stronger attitude than we are the voice of God. Next question.
Hi, my name is Rose. I'm with the Center for American Progress. My question is, partisan or openly partisan media is a lot more common in Europe than it is in the United States, and you mentioned the view from nowhere, and I think that's something that a lot of news organizations try to attain still. And I was wondering if you've observed any differences between European and US audiences in how a journalist's slant or a news organization's perceived slant affects their willingness to trust that work, and how that might affect your approach as you move into the United States.
Well, it definitely is more political and more polarized here, but it's as far as the Netherlands goes and wider Europe, that's going in the same direction. I mean, we see the same trends in polarization and partisanship and stuff like that in European media as well. My view would be not to take sides, but to try to find common concerns that affect everybody. Now, there are some people who are so to the extreme that if you say climate change is real, for example, you already are on one side, and you can't be taken seriously. But if you look for, and that would be my strategy here as well, if you look for things that are off the news radar because they don't fit into like a, I don't know, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative kind of narrative, we should really attack the whole narrative as such. Because there are common concerns below it, structural developments in society that are not partisan at all. I'll give you one example. We are considering having a correspondent divorces. It was tipped by one of our readers, and he said, if you explain or report on the Netherlands through the prism of divorce, like people divorcing, you will explain almost everything that is happening here. You will explain the problems on the housing market. You will explain broken families. You will explain youth problems. You will explain like everything out there. And there's no partisanship there because it's not a talking point anywhere. It's a completely different prism to put on the world. And people it's so original as a perspective, and especially as a beat, that people will have a hard time putting it in any column at all. And I think that would help overcome this what camp are you in?
Thank you.
100%. And related to this is something Jay has written about a bunch, and I think about a lot as well, which is the differentiation between troubles and issues. Troubles are the things you talk about at the dinner table with your family. Actually, one of our partners here from the Austin American Statesman, they've been reporting with Hearken and collecting people's questions, some after Hurricane Harvey, and people wanted to know, are we being price gouged after the hurricane? They were seeing prices go up with things. That's a trouble that people in their everyday, day-to-day lives are dealing with. Now, of course, that also goes up to a whole political and economic question and an issue level, but it's starting at the real experience of a human being that is not through the lens of like, what color am I, where do I live? I'm just a person trying to get things in the world. So I completely agree that when you just bring it down to the human level and not about the category that you're in, suddenly you can kind of dissolve some of that rhetoric, which is so toxic and divisive.
Right.
Yeah, I believe that the strongest combination going forward is going to be openness about a point of view. Here's where we're coming from, coupled with very high standards of verification. In order for us to publish it, we have to know it's true. Bulletproofing your stories, basing everything on documents, coupled with transparency. Don't believe us? Look for yourself. Here's the data. Here are the documents. Coupled with Hearken, listening to it. You put those four things together, and they will blow the view from nowhere out of the water. Yes?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Renata from Nexo in Brazil. We have a lot in common with the Correspondent. We launched 2 years ago, and we have the same editorial and business models, almost the same existential model. When we read about the Correspondent, we thought, wow, we must be doing something right. And we're growing very well. We also have a very horizontal relationship with our audience. We got very inspirational ideas here today, thank you. And the question is more about, we have a difference in terms of we have a paywall and you don't. Might be something to do with the difference between the Brazilian and Dutch societies at this point in time. But my question is whether or not there's space for more than one player like that in a country. We're first movers in Brazil, and if, and hopefully, trust-oriented news institutions become commodity, is there space for that kind of membership model?
Oh, yes, I would think so. People become members of a lot of things, a lot of clubs, a lot of platforms, and they might share some values, they might be very different. I don't see why there would be no room for a lot of different kind of models. I mean, there's so much to cover, and there's so much troubles to cover in journalism already in general. And you can have this model for all kinds of, different kinds of platforms. So yes, for sure. I don't see any reason why not.
Yeah, it's sort of like asking, could there be more than one environmental organization, or can there be more than one charity to save kids? Or
Sure.
once you realize that it's people's passions and the things they care most deeply about at the source of their membership. When we talked to the Correspondence members this summer, Emily and I went to Amsterdam and 2 other cities in the Netherlands. And we asked them why they support this organization. One of the interesting things we learned is that they liked the fact that the Correspondent was available to non-members because all links are free and there's no limit on the number of articles you can access, and you never get one of those notices that says you've read 8 of the 10 articles that you are allowed this month. They like that fact because they believe in this kind of journalism and they want it to spread to other people. I think this is a major factor in public radio in the United States as well. The members of public radio are partly what they're supporting is the fact that public radio is broadly available to other people, not just the members. And so that's what's exciting to me about membership. I understand why you would have a paywall and how that could be crucial in your success as well. But the fact that there are members who want this thing to exist for themselves and others who don't pay for it, I think is absolutely crucial to understanding their motivations. Also, another factor for them was the fact that they can read in depth about problems in Dutch society, and they know that they're also going to read about what can we do about this? What can I do as an individual? What can society do? Is crucial to why they support it. Because in effect, they are supporting the Correspondent because of their hope for a better world in the larger sense. It goes way beyond journalism.
I'm sorry, just very finishing. In the sense that it's a scarce good nowadays, and it might not be anymore. There's
A scarce...
scarcity for that kind of trusted institution right now.
Yeah.
And when there's not, whether
When
it's
it's not
sustainable-
scarce, maybe. We'll see.
But we actually encourage our members to subscribe to other media as well. So we don't think of them as competitors per se. We say, hey, this is great journalism here as well. You should pay for this. Or we actually link to paid articles, and we say, pay for it because it's good. And the opposite we do on top of our articles. We say, this article has been given to you. When you're not a member, you'll see this article has been given to you by paying member, and then the name of the member. So people will be reminded, oh, it's free, but somebody else paid for it.
Okay, 2 more
You have
questions.
so many good ideas.
Two more questions. This one and this one, please.
Hi, my name is Bo Kim. I work at Vox Media. Jen, this is primarily a question for you. I love this idea of like the value of bringing audience engagement deep into the heart of the newsroom and everything you do. One of the things I'm really curious about, we all know that depending on who you are, your identity, your background, we all have a very different experience, sort of expressing our opinions online. I'm very curious to hear about how you ensure diversity in not just your coverage, but also your audience and who you're getting information from, the experts that you're elevating, knowing that certain demographics are less likely to engage in the ways that you're describing.
100%. That's such a good question. I don't know if I got turned off. There I am. Thank you for asking that. So in terms of ensuring diversity in the editorial room, so if you think about how editorial rooms work now in the process, it's closed, right? So you have limited inputs leading to limited outputs. You have just the perspectives of the people in the room who maybe come from a similar disposition or education or class background or race or gender, whatever it may be. There's a lot of homogeneity in most newsrooms, which is no secret. And so when you're having those limited perspectives, you're getting limited outputs. So what Hearken helps do is bring more perspectives into the editorial room where decisions are being made, which is ensuring at least a little bit more life experience and ideas being batted around that people wouldn't have thought of themselves because they just didn't have that experience. Now, the thing is, when you're working with your audience, you're going to be getting the questions from people who are like you to some degree because they're attracted to the things you're making, which are coming from specific mindsets, et cetera. So you can just end up, coming up with more ideas, but not that different and not that serving of lots of people that you would love to serve, but who aren't coming to you. And so one of the things a lot of our partners are doing is they collect a zip code and the email address when people collect a question. And over time, they can download those zip codes and look and see a heat map of like where are people coming from. This is for local news specifically. They can say, oh my God, we're really over-serving this one community that we already know we're serving well, and we're really not getting questions from people on the south and west sides of Chicago, for instance. So now we can make a plan to partner with public libraries or to partner with other community groups in order to listen to and serve those communities better so that they will have a reason to care about us because we're showing that we care about them. So there are ways to start looking at those individual insights and then also looking at data and using those collectively to try and make sure more voices are brought up at the moment where they matter, which is when decisions are made.
Thank you. Last question.
Hi. So along with my two colleagues here, we head up Canada's fastest growing news site and the number 2 in the country. We're the ones that don't have endless funding. And what you're talking about scares the hell out of me. It scares the hell out of me, and I'm wondering, you mentioned you don't keep a lot of data on demographics and that sort of a thing, but I'm wondering whether you think you've tapped into a millennial thing here, because a lot of the language you are using sounds very millennial-ish to me, and I have a millennial test group living at home with me.
How big is it?
Pardon me?
How big is it?
It's 3 people in exactly the right demographic. The other thing I have, maybe it's more of a statement, but I read an awful lot of comments on the site every day, and some days I just want to pull my hair out. And I'm wondering, how much do you really trust the people that are reading news content?
Well, the first part of your question, I'm not sure what to say because I'm not sure what parts were so millennial to you. I'm 35, so I'm not sure. Does that qualify as a millennial?
You're
No?
in the
Sorry,
world.
Rob.
Old, too old? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, good.
You're an elder millennial.
So I can't answer that. No, and do we? Look, there are better contributions on our platform and than others. That's for sure. But the one thing that helps elevate the comment section for us is make your expectations of that whole section clear from the beginning. State very specifically what you want from your members in that comment section. And believe it or not, that really helps. Now, not every comment out there is brilliant and is worthwhile reading. We actually have a feature where we highlight the best comments and put them up. So people will save time sifting through hundreds of comments. But I've seen contributions by members that have been way more interesting and way more insightful and informative than the piece they were responding to, because they were right in the middle of the problem, or they were studying it for 20 years, or whatever. So yes, we trust our members to a very high degree. And if you breach that trust constantly by, I don't know, doing stuff we don't want you to do, we have rules. If you breach those rules, then you will eventually be cut out of the conversation.
Just to explain the millennial comment, what I'm trying to get at here is whether we're talking about a niche here or we're talking about a movement.
We'll find out when the Correspondent launches next year.
Well,
Don't answer that, Rob.
Okay.
We're out of time.
Everything is a niche in some sense. So.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Jennifer. We are adjourned.